Hi, everybody. Appreciate you tuning in for this little session today. I've got a very special guest with me today. If the woman on your screen looks at all familiar or looks at all like me, it's because it's my mother. Please say hello to Barbara Ickes.
Hello.
She makes her home in Perrysburg, Ohio. And let me share with you what our topic is today. This is intended to be a casual conversation between a mother and her son. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is a real hot topic, not only in our society, but I'm finding it to be a popular topic in the healthcare industry that I'm a part of. Healthcare Financial Management Association, HFMA, includes topics around diversity, equity, and inclusion with a lot of their conferences. A lot of the individual chapters are incorporating topics of DEI into their conferences and programs. And it's an important topic, a conversation that needs to be had. And so my mom had a really unique experience that I just really wanted to talk with her about and share with all of you. And so again, this is intended just to be a conversation about this, certainly not intended to take any kind of stance or offend anyone. So real anxious for your feedback. So first of all, let me frame it a little bit by saying I feel very blessed to have had the childhood that I did. I was born and raised in Toledo, Ohio. My mom and dad had two boys, myself and my younger brother. And my dad passed away in 1998 at the age of 61. And he was a wonderful man and just didn't have a bad bone in his body. People that knew him thought the world of him, and they especially loved his hugs. He always taught us to do unto others as you'd have them do unto you, the golden rule, and to treat everybody with kindness and respect, and until they gave you reason not to, really. And I really liked that. And my mom was very much the same way. She continues to be very active and thankfully is in good health. I'll let her tell you how old she is, but she remains active in her community and is engaged with the world around her. And she has a compassion for people and wants to feel like she's making a difference and being a good person without any of the fanfare that might come with it. Mom and dad were kind and loving to all people, regardless of race, religion, ethnicity. They had instilled that in my brother and me. So with that, Mom has a group that she's involved with at her church. And this past year, they were discussing racism in America and thought it would be interesting and educational to visit firsthand some of the places in the South that are an important part of the civil rights movement. So, Mom, to give this conversation maybe a little more context, just talk about the influence that racism had on you as you were growing up as a young woman and then into your adult years when you and Dad got married and you started raising children.
Well, to be honest, Bill, racism was never on my radar. As a product of going to school in the 40s and 50s, going to high school in the 50s, I lived in a white neighborhood. I had no reason to be conscious of race because, those are the years when you're pretty self-centered. You and your friends are interested in what each other is doing and trying to navigate how do you grow up. I felt safe, secure. I went off to a high school that was integrated, not dramatically like today, but we had African Americans in our school. And unless you were a star athlete, you were wallpaper. Nobody paid any attention to you. I had one Black fellow in my freshman mastery English class, and he would be representative of the 50s. He just kept still. He got good grades, but he never said a word. He never raised any kind of an issue. He was the most compliant, soft-spoken fellow. And there's a person who probably was passed over primarily because of his color. He was probably smarter than a lot of us. And so I remember him by name. But other than that, I have no memory of any significant conversation in high school with anybody of color. And that makes me so ashamed. I feel like I call those sins of omission, ignorance, absolute unawareness. But that was then, and this is now. I think that going off to college, I remember there were people of color in a room, a couple doors from my dorm, a couple doors down. I don't remember any more than just a hello. I never got acquainted with them. And to this day, I really regret all the friendships that I've missed by living in a white bubble. Now, at this stage in my life, I think the 60s really got my attention. You know, I was a great dad, and I thought the world of Martin Luther King for what he represented. I mean, you know, he was no more perfect than anybody else, but he was exemplary. He was as close to a role model of nonviolent social justice that I can think of. And so that really got our attention. And then it was kind of fashionable when white people felt so much guilt for their ignorance, they would reach out and do these patronizing things for maybe a week. Maybe they'd take a black child with them on an exotic vacation. Well, that would be like taking me to Buckingham Palace and then sending me home after a week and saying, well, now you've been exposed to what it's like to be a royalty. Now go back to your life. So I look back on all those little pieces coming together. But I repeat, it was the 60s that got my attention. I remember Dad and I sitting out on our front steps with you and John and hearing about the riots 50 miles away in Detroit after the assassination of King, and thinking we are 50 miles away and we're just sitting here as peaceful as can be.
Right.
It was ironic. It was peculiar. It was an incredibly unsettled feeling. So, all right, fast forward. I'm in my white bubble. I live in a white neighborhood. My friends are white. I'm in organizations that are white. I occasionally will be someplace with a person of color, which is fine, but I don't really have any particular engagement. And then about 10 years ago, I mean, I've been evolving because as you get older, you have time to evolve. You have time. All the things that are required when you're young, when you're raising your kids, when you're getting them off to college, and then you have time to think, I'm going to focus on some things I've never taken time for. So I've read a lot. I've read a lot of books, a lot of these discussions in my social justice group at church. We've read a lot. We've talked a lot. I mean, we have been looking for answers. We have questions. We don't have all the answers, but we're curious and want to learn. So about 10 years ago, I went to a big event in Toledo that was at one of the high schools, and it was called an Introduction to Dialogue to Change. And again, what prompted me to go to that? I just went. And when I was there, it was a huge turnout, and it was a great cross section of Toledo. Everybody from the elected officials and prominent people and people that wandered in off the street. It was great. And we had a wonderful presentation. I should have written down the guy that spoke to us that got our attention about being white and what is incumbent upon us to recognize. So the long and the short of it is they passed out cards that night if you wanted to sign up to be a part of anything. And of course, I signed on the dotted line. I didn't know what I was signing. But sure enough, it wasn't more than 2-3 weeks later, I received a phone call. And since I've had a fair amount of experience in training groups and organizing things, they invited me to come for a training. And I did.
Yeah.
And that led me to become a trainer in Dialogue to Change, which is a national program. And it was implemented here in Toledo, and it functions because I would be partnered with a Black person, and we would have a group of maybe no more than 14, about half and half, white and Black or Asian, anyway, a good ethnic mix. And we had a curriculum, and it was a huge eye-opening experience for me. Thankfully, we had a curriculum that I wasn't just freelancing, that I had the direction I needed to interface. And Otis Gordon, who's a marvelous friend and a Black pastor, was my counterpart. He and I had such regard for him. But I realized my ignorance as a white person was pathetic. I mean, I really realized you can just live your whole life and be oblivious to whole chunks of our society.
Well, you knew of some of the things going on in the world and in society related to
Right.
racism, but you weren't
Right.
experiencing it firsthand. I mean, you didn't,
No,
just going back, there weren't any negative necessarily in any, you didn't witness any actions or aggressions
Nope.
toward blacks when you were growing up. And
No.
it was just, we were, to your earlier point, we were quite removed from it.
right. We were in the white bubble. Now, there are still people living in a bubble of one sort or another. I don't want to be in a bubble. I'm too old to be in a bubble. I want to be out with people that aren't like me, because this is my last chance to interface with people. I've missed so many people because of segregation, I guess you call it. Now, of course, we're much more integrated. We've made enormous progress, but doing this dialogue to change, I'll just tell you one little anecdote. I remember our first session, Otis and I had a really good group, and I was so naive that there were a couple of seats left, and I remember a Black woman, Jackie Martin, was sitting, and then there was an empty chair on side of her, and then there was an empty chair on the side of a white person, and a person came in late, and I naively said, "Oh, why don't you sit down there next to Mary or something?" And it was a microaggression. In other words, I had no thought that that would offend Jackie. But she said later in the gathering, she said, "I have to get something off my chest." She said, "If I don't say this, I'm going to just blow up." And she called me out and said, "Why would you have suggested that Tom sit next to Mary, as opposed to either letting him sit wherever or having him sit next to me?" And I mean, that was a teachable moment. I said, "Jackie," and I like Jackie a lot. I said, "Jackie, I am thankful that you got that off your chest." I said, it's going to take me a while to get it off mine."
Yeah.
Because I said, I was oblivious.
You had no ill intent. You had no ill intent
ignorant.
whatsoever, but it just was how it was perceived.
It was just ignorance. And those little microaggressions, I'm in a couple of groups which are integrated, and we have these wonderful, straightforward conversations about things that you and I, as white people, don't even know what that feels like. I have friends, Black friends, that feel to this day, they know that they're being followed, or there are a whole bunch of things. So I don't want to belabor that. I want to say that, all right, this dialogue to change, we did several sessions. It was so enriching, and I learned to be accepting of things that I would normally at my age think, "Oh, no, don't say it that way," or that. I had to get over all those crazy things, those judgments that I was making out of the framework of my value system or my life. Sure. These were all good people. I mean, human beings.
Yeah.
So, all right. So now let me fast forward to this trip. I've been drawn to this racial stuff for the last many years. I mean, I just felt like I had unfinished business. Maybe it's left over from my guilt of high school, but I thought I've got to somehow redeem myself in this. I've got to find out more. So when we made this trip, do you want me to talk about the trip now?
Sure. Yeah, I was going to ask you, talk about what you all decided to do and why it was important to you, and how that just came about.
Sure.
And then we'll talk about each stop on the trip.
Right. Well, our group, it's an interesting group of people. Of course, we're all white, and we're at church, happened to be at UCC church. And we're pretty progressive people. And this particular group, social justice group, we've been reading books like White Fragility and White Like Me. I mean, several books that are eye openers. And one of the persons in the group, David Anderson, said, "Wouldn't it be interesting if we actually did a road trip, a civil rights history tour?" And that just got my attention right away. So we got to work. He said, "Is there anybody else that's interested?" And there were 4 of us, including him, that said, "Sure." So I went to work and found a Black organization in Birmingham, Alabama, Freedom Line Tours. Got acquainted with the owner, Antonio Ravel. And I mean, we must have talked 100 times and back and forth with trying to plan this whole thing. It turned out that we could put this all together, and we had a coach that met us in Atlanta. We flew to Atlanta, got into our coach with our driver, and there were 2 Black people on our trip.
That's what I was gonna
There-
ask you.
One
What
was
what
the
was the makeup
partner.
of the group? What was the makeup of the group?
Makeup of the group. There were 30 of us, 20 from our church, 6 from Chicago who were relatives or friends of one of the people on our trip, and then 3 other people or 4 other people that were from out of town that used to go to our church, and a couple of younger people that had grown up in our church and then moved away. So 30. Well, 2 of these people, one of the people from our church, Rod, a white guy, his partner is a black man. And so we got acquainted with him, of course, but he had a brother who had lived for years in Birmingham, and he was now in Toledo. He's a musician and a choir director and a very accomplished person. And he said, do you suppose I could go on the trip too? So we said, sure. So we did have 2 black people on the trip, and that was great. All right, so we got to Atlanta, got in our coach, and off we went to Birmingham. And that evening we had a talk. A pastor from a church in Birmingham talked about Martin Luther King's letter from the Birmingham jail, which is powerful. I mean, and his writing skills and the way he expresses himself, it's just a magnificent letter. So we had a talk with him about that. And then the next morning we got up and got in our coach, and we went to the 16th Street Baptist Church where those children were
Right.
killed with the bombing.
1963 bombing, yeah.
Right. And we had a wonderful tour of that church. They were very particular about masking and everything. And we went downstairs first. We had a lecture. There were marvelous photographs of everything. And then we went up to the sanctuary, and the sanctuary was beautiful. And it happens that Tony, the musician that lives in Toledo now, that had been in Birmingham, he had been the music director there for a long time. And so the person that was giving us the talk there said, we have Tony, what's his last name? Patton, Anthony Patton, with us today, and he's going to play the organ and the piano. And so we were, of course, all excited that he was going to perform. So first he played the piano, and he just did a magnificent job. And then he went to the organ, and he played what's called the Black National Anthem. Let all, oh gosh, I'm drawing a blank. Let all rise. What's the title of it? I'm drawing a blank.
Sure.
Let every voice. Let rise and let every voice sing. It's what people call the Black National Anthem. So we got out the books and we just belted out that song while he played the organ.
Wow.
And then one of the people in our group, Al Campan, a retired professor, had to point out that he, as a young man going to the University of Chicago, he'd gone south with his friends to register Black people to vote. And he was in that church in the balcony, and when he heard Martin Luther King give a speech. So that was really neat. And then we did the other things in Birmingham. We walked into the park that has incredible statuary and incredible exhibits and artificial grate where you have children behind it, and the awful guy from Birmingham that was the guy with the dogs. I'm drawing a blank on his name too, but he was the chief of police, and he was wicked and evil with these Black kids. And so
was that a guided tour, Mom? Was that a guided tour?
Yeah, and Antonio was leading it, we were informed. We weren't just wandering blind. Right. She would tell us about all this, and we were a long time there, and then we wandered around. We went to a street in Birmingham that would be where all the Black upscale stores were, and the barber shops. And barber shops in the Black community are real, like churches. They are a vital place to gather. Everything we were seeing was reinforcing what we had read, but it was in real time. I mean, we can all read, but seeing the evidence of this over and over again. And then we got on our coach that night. And
before you leave, before you talk about going off to Selma, let me just ask you. So I'm just curious about the dynamic with the group, you know, as all of this was evolving. Did people have a lot of questions, or was it, did you feel like you were receiving information from the people talking to you about these different places, or was there some dialogue amongst all of you about these different things, and maybe what people remember at certain parts of their times in their lives or whatever?
Yeah, we did have dialogue, but we really were all on the same page in terms of what we were hearing. It was, we when we were on the bus, you know,
Sure.
going from point A to point B, we would discuss things we had seen, and we were sort of just stunned. I mean, we were so struck, and it kept getting this way. I mean, I'll tell you more when we get to Montgomery, but it was just, we're realizing we're down here on this pathway. I mean, this is history. This is history. This is civil rights history, and people endured things that I don't know that white people today could endure. What Black people endured.
Oh my gosh.
I don't.
Yeah.
So yeah, and of course we would. Oh, we asked a lot of questions. And everything was clarified. I mean, we were answered on anything and everything we wanted to know.